Welcome to Forward Radio's Truth to Power. This is Hart Hagen. I'm your host, and today I'm joined by Blair Leano-Helvey of Idlewild Butterfly Farm and also Barbara Berman from the Highlands Douglas Reforestation Project. How y'all doing today?
Good.
Blair is our featured guest. I'm thrilled to have her because of our common interest in native plants and insects. So I'm going to give Blair a proper introduction. Blair Leano-Helvey is the owner and mastermind behind Idlewild Butterfly Farm. Blair founded Entomology Solutions LLC in 2009, providing sustainable biological control solutions to plant pests in greenhouses, nurseries, farms, and the home. Blair has always had a passion for all things creepy and crawly, and Idlewild is her way of sharing that passion with her local community. With backgrounds in various areas of entomology, such as biological control, pollinator and butterfly conservation, insect rearing, and more, Blair and the team of entomologists at Idlewild are some of the friendliest and most knowledgeable folks around. So, Blair, tell me what inspired you to get started with Idlewild Butterfly Farm?
I needed a job.
Yeah.
I mean, that's honestly, I needed a job, and I always liked insects. I mean, I've had several previous lives. I actually started in music performance when I went to college. I focused on pipe organ and violin. And when I went to school and realized that, look, there were so many graduate students that were from like Juilliard and Eastman and music. And I was like, well, there's not any jobs in music. So I went to something else that there aren't any jobs in, and that's entomology. And I worked in oral and maxillofacial surgery as an assistant for a long time, and general dentistry. And I actually applied to dental school. I didn't get in. And so I worked at the dental school, and I didn't like. Okay.
So Blair, you got your entomology degree at UK, is that right? What was that like, and how did you like it? What did you learn from it?
Well, when I was looking to switch, I saw that I was going to do horticulture. And then when I was looking into their College of Ag, I saw they had entomology, and that was uh, right up my alley. I always loved insects. If I was smart, I would have probably double majored in horticulture, and I'm a horticulture entomologist, basically. Um, and then I worked in insect physiology, and got some really great experience learning how to rear insects. So I was raising, I know I've seen your posts lately about like Braconid wasp and like the Manduca sexta, specifically the tobacco hornworm, and I raised those systems. Except we were looking at it from more a physiological standpoint than as a biological control standpoint. Um, and I was doing a graduate level project in my undergrad, and I was just burned out, and I didn't want to go to grad school, and I just was ready to go. When you're young and dumb.
So you've always liked bugs. That's kind
I
of
always like
weird.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Here, I'm going to I'm going to gripe for a minute about people's attitudes toward bugs, and I want you to respond. Most of a lot of the alien movies are some kind of mocked up version of an insect where we're taught to hate insects. I like saying, question anything you've ever learned on TV, because if they'll sell you a poison to kill insects, but we have an insect Armageddon now. We have a worldwide collapse of biological species, not least of all insects. So am I on the right track with that, or do we have a
Absolutely.
completely misplaced fear of insects?
So in the world of biological control, I mean, that's not a new science at all. Prior to the birth of DDT, which was developed after mustard gas after World War II, that's all that was available in terms of crop control was biocontrol. And so we actually had many insectaries, which are bug factories that produce these biological agents. But when DDT came out, I mean, it was very effective. It was quick. You didn't really have to monitor. You didn't have to think. It was just something you used, and it was effective. And so I think scientists, if you're familiar with like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, I mean, there are a lot of people who have known where we're headed with these types of of insecticides and pesticides. I do believe that there is a place for pesticide, but those are extreme measures. In my opinion, I think that we need to save those for when it is needed for things such as emerald ash borer, or other invasive pests, or entomopathic disease. If we have, the more insects are really good at becoming resistant to insecticides. You can't get ahead of the problem. Or like GMO crops, they will always build up a resistance to that. So you can't beat out nature. But what we're seeing, is we are losing the number of insects that we have. And there's a lot of the insects that will be the most affected by climate change and habitat loss are our specialized insects. So we have examples where there's just, one pollinator that pollinates one plant, and that's a very specialized, evolved system. And those are the ones that will be the first affected.
So many people are familiar with those specialized relationships in the, like monarch butterflies need milkweed. And can you talk about host plants and why that's important and what we can do?
Absolutely. So every butterfly and moth has a plant or a group of plants that they continue their life cycle on. And of course, the monarch butterfly is the most recognized. So their host plant is, of course, milkweed. And we have lost many, many acres of our natural milkweed, especially in their summer breeding grounds, like the Ohio Basin and areas like that, due to large-scale farming. A couple years ago, so many people focus on the monarch. The monarch is kind of the poster child for habitat loss and insect loss. And like you said, like insect Armageddon, basically, or the apocalypse of the insect world. So, there's people love to raise them at home. They love to tag them. I think it's a great way to get everybody involved. We call Idlewild Bug Church because we get everybody. It doesn't matter. We get the far right, the far left, everything in between. And it's just so interesting when we are able to do programs. You just have so many different walks of life in one area for a cause like the monarch butterfly, and that makes it very special. So of course, your people are making their own monarch way stations and pollinator patches. But it's not just, we can't forget that it's just us that has to take care of the monarchs. We also have to focus on the butterfly sanctuaries in Mexico, where they spend their winter. And we have been taking groups of people down there to stay, specifically in Macheros, Mexico. That borders, it's kind of in between the state of Mexico and the state of Michoacan. And it's a very poor area. Mexico has greatly been impacted by U.S. policy, NAFTA. It's just a poor country.
So this is the area where the monarchs go in the wintertime.
Where they stay, yes. And I actually had a conversation a couple days ago with the family that hosts us when we visit. Because how can we help them? So they have made a great little economy in their area for monarch tourism. If you've never been, if you can ever go, I mean, it's hard to explain until you see it. But again, it is a very poor area, and there's a lot of illegal logging of the oil mill firms. I think a fir tree can go for $20 US, if I'm correct on that, which is not a lot of money to us, but it's a lot of money to them. And so soon, in a week or two, we'll be putting out a fundraiser to help them, to help reduce the amount of illegal logging. So I think a yearly salary for the men that work in those mountains to take care of the forest is $5,000. which is not a lot of money,
Mm-mm.
but it is there.
Right.
Um, and that, I think it's also been a great way for people to develop. I think people, they hear Mexico and sometimes people are like, are you scared to go there? I'm like, are you scared to be here? I mean, it's a beautiful country, and it's a lot of culture, and it's kind of sad that we're not going really this season, but so how can we help them? But I do think that there is, we just as Americans think about the monarchs here, and once we send them off, we don't have to think about them again, but we also have to think about their overwintering grounds.
Okay, so Blair, the monarch butterfly needs milkweed for its life. What about some of the other butterflies, some of the swallowtail butterflies, like black swallowtail, eastern swallowtail, those? What do they need to live?
So we raise, spice bush it's our all time. We can always depend on our spice bush butterflies. Spice bush and sassafras is a great addition to the home garden. The thing about insects, they have to have a way to defend themselves or to disguise themselves. And spice bush caterpillars look like little snakes, and I
Mhm.
just, they roll themselves up in the leaves, and they're fine. They're on wild ones. I've found that people are finding spice bush on their spice bush, and it's exciting to be able to, roll a leaf and see little
Right.
caterpillar like a snake. So that's a great one. Of course, tiger swallowtails or a sweet bay magnolia and tulip poplars. Um, of course, the tulips we have those all over the highlands. Um, so I actually see quite a few tigers. They've been a little slow this year, but I'm starting to see some wild ones out and about at the top of uh, the tulip poplar canopies. Zebra swallowtails. People don't even think can't believe that's a native butterfly. Of course, that's the pawpaw tree, which is also a great addition to a home garden. It's a very manageable tree that also bears fruit. So that's a 2 for 1. You have your eastern black swallowtails, and we always find those like on our fennel and our dill or our parsley in the garden. And I'm missing one, pipevine, our
Okay.
pipevine swallowtail. So, and of course, that's a Aristolochia, which is your pipe vine. Uh, but we have a couple native species of that.
You mentioned that zebra swallowtail. Barbara and I saw some in Louisville Nature Center, and Rosemary said, even though they have a lot of pawpaw there, Rosemary said that they're just now getting those zebra swallowtails in, even though the pawpaws have been there the whole time, but now the zebra swallowtails are finding it, and now they can make use
Right.
of it.
Right.
So,
And so when we raise butterflies, we don't send them all to exhibits. We don't sell them all. We actually do a lot of releases. So we actually actively go around Jefferson County and other surrounding counties and look for habitat. Nature Center, the Louisville Zoo, because they have a couple large way stations, but also have other host plants to attract other butterflies. South End, West End, we look for habitat, and that's where we are intentionally releasing butterflies. It's kind of like our own citizen science project to see if that is indeed effective.
well, that sounds very strategic. You're releasing these butterflies in different places where they have host plants where they can raise their young. That sounds very strategic.
Yeah, and so we've reached out to the Nature Center, to ask them if, when we have a lot of eggs, can we just leave them on their host? Because they have large biomass. So they have large spice bush, large pawpaw. And basically, all they can use it as an educational tool. And then once they become, get to their chrysalis stage and they emerge, just release them there. But we do pride ourselves on raising healthy moths and butterflies. And it's taken a while to get there. It's a lot of trial and error, a lot of disappointment. Um, but I do believe that if we are putting things, if we are actively breeding, we have to be careful of what we are putting in the environment.
Well, there's been some talk about like certain problems. I don't know about raising monarchs for release. I don't really know. What are some of the problems that have been associated with that? And is there any truth in any of that?
Well, I always ask to see the data. Show
Hmm.
me the data.
Yeah.
Show me the scientific proof of what you were stating. Um, but yeah, there is a protozoan that's very specific to the Danaid family, which is the monarch family, and that is OE, and that's the abbreviated name. It's such a long name that I can't even pronounce. But it's naturally occurring, but in a breeding capacity, it can be very devastating. And what happens is the spores are very, very sticky. So if you have a female that is infected with that, that spore can be on the egg. And once ingested by a hatchling, the protozoan just multiplies exponentially. Um, but again, it is naturally occurring, but in breeding, it can be really bad if you were not testing your females, if you're not using clean milkweed, if you're not sanitizing your hands. I mean, it can just be um, a total loss. And that's really kind of how Idlewild came to be. I had already started doing the biocontrol business, I very much follow the greenhouse season. So start in January, and by May, I not doing very much. Which is kind of different now because now we kind of push biological control to homeowners now in place of pesticides and insecticides. Um, so I started raising butterflies, and I would take them to the farmer's market to see if people were interested, because many people have never experienced metamorphosis. So it's something that was just very new, and people were really drawn to it, and I would sell out. But in a home, it's very hard to, we're using 10% bleach solutions to clean everything. And it was very hard to keep things sanitary in the house. And the last brood I raised at my home, I ended up having to freeze because the OE was so bad, and it's just devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really kind of that almost made me just stop. But then I started working on a business plan, and then a year later I had Idlewild. So it's easier to have a lab that I can easily sanitize and do all the things that need to be done in order to raise at a scale
Yeah.
that we can raise
Another
safely.
thing that's been talked about is like, okay, so monarch butterflies need milkweed, and there are some species of milkweed that are native to our area and some that are not. You have the tropical milkweed that may not be native to our area. You like using it, and yet some people have been saying that tropical milkweed can carry disease or something like that. What's the deal
So
there?
what happens is we use the tropical milkweed because it stays safe, or stays soft. I'm sorry. So I can cut it multiple times and it can flush back out on me. We put it back in the greenhouse to keep it away from wild butterflies. Um, but places like Florida, where they have like overwintering populations there, or warmer areas, the tropical milkweed doesn't necessarily die back there. And so it keeps getting visited by wild monarchs. And so the protozoan levels, that OE, builds up. So conservationists in those areas are telling people, if you're growing this milkweed, why don't you cut it back 2 or 3 times in the season so it can flush back out with fresh growth and not have those high levels of OE on it. There's also been speculation that um, the tropical milkweed still blooms into late fall, and that keeps the monarchs from migrating. Well, insects are regulated by weather and by temperature. And so it's not uncommon, for me to see in early November, the sun to come out and reach 40 degrees, and you see a late monarch. And so when it gets cooler, it is taking longer for your caterpillar to finish its life cycle to pupation than to adult. But that milkweed is all over Mexico, yet the monarchs still make it to the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's just trying to explain, and I get it. People want to do the right thing. You can't fault people for wanting to do the right thing and to look for the information. I mean, when we do like the life cycle kits, we use a tropical milkweed. And some people, especially folks that live in like retirement homes, we have sold a lot of pots of milkweed because that gives people something to do to watch and raise the monarchs in a very small space.
Mhm.
So,
Another thing that I've seen on your social media activity is the showy moths, like Sucropia models, or
uh-huh.
and those are just beautiful. You know, when you think of the big, huge moth that's as
Moth
big
rat.
as your hand almost. So what does it take to, what host plants do they need, and what are the different types of moths
The
that you've
great
been able to
thing
raise?
about moths is that they can definitely have a lot of different host plants. So we specifically for our moths we use a lot of cherry, just like regular black cherry,
Hmm.
sweet gum, birch, what else? And linden. I actually have a couple linden trees I put at Idlewild. And we raise a variety of moths. So of course, a lot of the Saturniids, which are your silk moths, like your Cecropids, your Polyphemus, and they are a lot of them are univoltine, which means they just have one brood a season. Lunas get two, um, and that's our one of our most popular moths. Um, but a lot of people are becoming interested in raising their own moths, and so it's like, how can we do that effectively and not have people get discouraged? Because not all the eggs that are laid are supposed to make it to adults. That's why females lay so many eggs to ensure that at least maybe one makes it.
Hmm.
At Idlewild, we're getting about 90%.
Mm.
So, but it's a very controlled environment. Um, but even just at we have released a lot of moths in the Highlands neighborhood, in Deer Park neighborhood, over towards of course the nature center, places where we see lots of trees. And so I'm hoping um, that next year people maybe will see an increase. When they start emerging, we'll know in the spring, next spring.
So Barbara's involved in tree planting, like Highlands Douglas reforestation. You named four trees that are good native trees, and they're also host plants for the Cecropia. You named the linden, you named the black cherry, and so how do you tell? Let's just take a minute to raise awareness that if you have these native trees, then they provide habitat for our moths and our butterflies, and the moths and butterflies become pollinators. The ones that don't become pollinators become bird food, because a lot of caterpillars serve as bird food.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And oaks, I left out oaks. Oaks are extremely important host plants. And the Highlands has a lot of oak. I would like to see more sweet gum.
Hmm.
That's a big favorite of a lot of these caterpillars. Um, but yeah, and we'd posted about the Luna moths and why their tails are so important. There's a scientist, I believe, in Idaho, who did his research just a few years ago that their little curly tails mess up the ecolocation of bats. And so a lot of times when we have found, which makes sense because when we have seen like Luna wings, because usually they just go for that, the soft, chewy body, crunchy on the outside, chewy on the inside. But their tails have been missing. So it's really interesting. And that's normal. I mean, sometimes they just, it's it's almost like nine lives, how often, how quick how many
So
times
there was a blip in the audio. So you're saying the echolocation of bats gets
of
messed
bats is
up by their
by their
tails,
tails because they're twirling their tails.
and some of their tails have been missing?
If I see, sometimes you'll see like when we find like wings on the ground where they've obviously been eaten by a bat,
Mhm.
they've missed, their wings are gone. And so the scientist that did his research with the bats, he was actually removing tails from lunas,
Oh,
and they would just get eaten immediately.
oh. Mhm.
But the ones that had their tails were able to escape.
Uh,
And that's what's so fascinating about the natural world
oh
is
yeah.
just if people would just take the time. A lot of this is small and goes very unnoticed, um, but insects serve a I mean, they're very important to us. And I think we can go back to what you first said: is people don't like insects, or they have such a bad um, they have a negative feelings towards them. But I don't think people realize how important they are to our existence and to our, our food chain and
Mhm.
to our birds. Yeah, I don't want my Lunas to be eaten, but that's a very important part of a bat's diet. I think my cardinals like them too, because I kind of found them outside under the bushes. I don't think that's a bat. But I mean, it is what it is. I mean, that's why, it's important to have our trees and our native trees and other habitat. I mean, it's
So,
makes it
an
food.
ecosystem can be seen as a way of transferring energy. You and I are living and breathing and all that because we have some energy, and so the energy comes from the sun first, and then to plants, and then from plants to insects. And if you need the right plants to have the the diversity of the insects. The insects, visit plants and get energy from the plants and then take that energy to a lot of other things. And if you don't have those native plants, then you don't have the diversity of the insects and the whole ecosystem goes away. Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it goes to education. Um, I think humans are very good at taking themselves out of an ecosystem. We have this mentality that we run the ecosystem, and we don't. We actually are a part of the ecosystem. And it's just education and educating. And again, it's not just children. I mean, we attract everybody. Um, there are a lot of folks that have very personal feelings of butterflies or feel like past loved ones have visited them in the form of a butterfly, and we like those stories, and that's important for people. Um,
So
but we
another
Go ahead.
butterfly. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but your fritillary butterflies need the violets, or
Yes.
there's another thing. But people think violets are weeds, and they want to get rid of the weeds, and I can't get rid of these darn violets, but that's another. And the insecticide companies come in and spray broadleaf herbicide and get rid of the violets. And am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, and violets are. I love violets, and
Mhm.
we would need a horticulturist like maybe Tavia or Margaret, Dr. Carrero to. I might be screwing this up, but violets bloom twice. So they bloom, what we see is a little purple flower, and then they bloom underground too. It's just kind of a really
Really?
interesting. Yeah, if you sometimes because I actually keep certain clusters of violets. I don't leave all my violets, but I leave a lot, and I just have very designated areas where I want them. And we love violets.
Hmm.
Something that we do with the little flowers in the spring when they come up, besides make little bouquets, we make simple syrup. We make a tea out of the violet, and then we make a simple syrup with it, and we make little fizzy drinks, and it's just fun and purple. But yes, they are important host plant for like your great spangled fritillary. And they actually, the fritillaries, uh, that one, for instance, actually overwinters as a caterpillar. So insects have to be able to overwinter. So how are they going to overwinter if you don't have a host plant? So violets are definitely something that we encourage. They're not invasive. If you don't want them, they easily come up. But you can just keep they serve a very important purpose, and I think they make a really pretty ground cover. It's just trying to get people to think of something differently because we've been trained to think that bigger is beautiful. No blemishes is you have to have perfect looking everything. Um, and these yards just very sterile, and I think, then there's
Well,
they use
what are some of the
behavior that's
downsides
too
of the
hard.
perfect lawn? I remember once you told me, I believe, if I remember correctly, that you chose the neighborhood for Idlewild Butterfly Farm. Why did you choose that neighborhood?
For a few reasons, but one is because it's a neighborhood that does not have a lot of lawn care, and that is highly attractive to us. Um, I People are amazed, like when we've had students come down from U of L or at UK to do pollinator counts or just look at the diversity of insects that we have in such a um, a city setting. They're just amazed by it. We have bats. We have lots of wildlife. We have purple martins. So we just have a really um, fantastic ecosystem that is really high in numbers of good bugs and bad bugs right there on Logan Street.
Well, speaking of bad bugs, people think that they need to get rid of mosquitoes, and I suppose that's there's I don't know about that. Mosquitoes don't bite me very much, but do people need to get rid of mosquitoes? Do we overreact about mosquitoes? If we do control mosquitoes, what's the best way to do that?
Well, mosquitoes do serve a purpose. I mean, they are a essential food source for aquatic wildlife. You know, whether it's fish, dragonflies, damselfly larvae, um, they're very beneficial in that way. I'm definitely tasty to mosquitoes, as everyone else in my house is. You know, we've had a lot of calls about. I guess there's a company outside of Frankfurt or Lexington that's been offering, you know, to release sterile males. And I can't really comment on that because I've not done enough research to know the pros and cons of that. We offer a product called Mosquito Barrier, and that's what it works as a barrier. And it's just garlic. It's 99% garlic with 1% citric acid as a preservative. And the trick to it is just being very heavy-handed with
Well,
it.
that's no fun. There's no neurotoxins.
Right, right. It's always sad if you see them when they start gassing our neighborhoods. And if any of those, you know, your poor butt. There's a couple people on Wild Ones. I remember last year they knew the trucks were coming, and God love them. They were just going out through their yards and just gathering their spiders, which was so sweet that
Hmm.
people would actually go save their spiders and
Hmm.
you know, their caterpillar, anything they could find. They just gathered them up in all these, you know, whatever Rubbermaid, you know, plasticware containers they had.
So you're saying that there is a way of controlling mosquitoes that does not involve chemical pesticides.
Right, and a lot of it's common sense too. You know, don't let water. And sometimes we're the worst culprits. You know, because we try to remind ourselves, yeah, we have to go check out our because we'll have buckets of, you know, stinging nettles and things like that. And they may have too much water, and we'll get mosquitoes. So, female mosquitoes don't like to go too far from their breeding grounds. You know, gutters are absolutely a breeding ground for mosquitoes. So just trying to, you know, use some just common sense practices, you know, clean out the gutters, make sure you don't have standing water anywhere. But the mosquito barrier, I mean, that's probably one of our best products that we offer in the summertime. And again, it's just being very heavy handed with it. It's of course water soluble. So if you get 3 days of rain, you're going to have to reapply it. But um, of course, we don't wear any kind of bug spray on us because we're raising insects. Um, we had a gal a few summers ago that worked, and she raised the most beautiful monarchs or caterpillars, and when they pupated, they were so deformed, every single one of them. She was treating her dog for fleas, so she would pet her dog and then handle the
Oh,
caterpillars. And so the type of pesticide it was, that's how it worked. It affected the pupa stage. So
so is
that was
there fleas are insects, right? So is
fleas are
there
insects.
what do you recommend for treating fleas on dogs?
Well, we don't, you know, our permit allows us only to give advice for agriculture settings, but we can treat your yard for fleas.
Hmm.
One being beneficial nematodes. You say nematodes, people panic because they think you're talking about like root knot nematodes, but there are beneficial nematodes, just like we have beneficial stink bugs. Not all stink bugs are bad. And they're just a microscopic roundworm. You water them in the soil, they go after so many pests, but fleas one of them. We also use a beneficial mite. It's probably the one we use the most in greenhouses, but we also use it in the home garden, and it's long-term flea control. It's also one that we use for chiggers. We have a kind of a combo we use for chigger control. And again, these are long-term pest control. So the
So you're talking
USDA
about biological control
biological
for
control.
fleas, for chiggers, and you've mentioned mites a couple of times. So you have
Yeah, so
mites that.
we use a lot of beneficial mites.
Mhm.
So the USDA regulates what we can release. And so in the biological world, it's either something that's already native and present in our environment, or it's a tropical that will die upon your first frost.
Hmm.
But the ones that I've just spoke of, like the beneficial mites for chiggers and fleas, luckily are native. And so they just reproduce exponentially. For years. So it's a lot of times, sometimes just in a greenhouse setting, when I treat the floor, the perimeter of a greenhouse, that's just a one-time application, generally for the life of the house. So that's the one thing about biocontrol when you're working with the greenhouse. Um, it's a lot of money up. It's a big upfront cost because you're covering so much ground. I mean, the largest, I've probably done 5 acres of greenhouse. I mean, I've done a lot of greenhouse work. I don't really go after greenhouse growers much anymore. It's just, it's a mindset. You know, a lot of times when a greenhouse grower calls me, it's because they can no longer chemically get control of a pesticide resistant pest. And so you're changing the ecosystem of a controlled environment, and it takes time. It is not a quick fix. So instead of going after the greenhouse growers, we offer plants that are grown biologically. We guarantee they're not sprayed with chemicals. But we also offer uh, these services to homeowners. Um, and it's just, again, it's education and show them that it does work and this is how you use it. I mean, folks that are in the biological world, I mean, we're just held at a different standard than a chemical company. I mean, um, it's just ironic. A lot of these insects again are on a very small level, um, and so people think we're just selling them like a bottle of sawdust or something. So we show them how to see if your bugs are alive, how to use a hand lens or a loop and look at your bugs and what's a pest, and just trying to get people to we used to be able to do what's called a degree day analysis, and we could determine when we'll see pests. Well, now we have this thing called climate change. And so it's hard to do a degree day analysis now for pests because we have such erratic weather patterns.
So when
Um,
you can use biological control, the benefit is that it's not chemical.
Absolutely. I mean, the only thing about biological control is that your pests reproduce faster than your parasitoids and predators. And that's just nature's way to ensure that they have something to eat or to parasitize. So biocontrol is using mass amounts of these big, it's like your army, and you're releasing an army in an area. And it's much better to be proactive than reactive because in a greenhouse, once there's already, it's just not economically worth saving. I mean, I have had instances where I do have to make a recommendation for a pesticide, and I try to do something that's soft, that's not a neonicotinoid. They love neonicotinoids. A lot of growers do, and it's just trying to understand why. Why
So
are
the
you?
neonicotinoid is something that gets into the system of the plant and it
It's a
kills any
systemic
insect that
pesticide.
visits the plant.
Yes, and again, I do believe that there is. I do have a greenhouse or a nursery that we work with, and they do use a neonic, but it's for at a very specific time of the year, and it's for a very short period. It's just a one application, and that's for emerald ash borer. And I do understand that, but in terms of just basic pest control, I mean, there's just another thing that's great about biological control, we don't have to worry about reentry intervals. And your reentry intervals, when you have to shut down your nursery or your farm or greenhouse after you sprayed. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry
Hmm.
about suiting up. You don't have to worry about taking notes and, keeping track of what pesticides, we used to call IPM, which is
Because
insect.
these pesticides typically can also be harmful to people.
Oh,
So you're
yeah.
saying you have to be careful if you use the chemical pesticide. There's a period of time before humans can go back into the
Yes.
place where it was applied.
Yes. And
Yeah,
I've been in a lot of greenhouses and I've seen a lot of things. And it's just trying to understand the thinking. And when growers are dealing with, I mean, I'm dealing with multi-million-dollar crops, and it it's trying to understand, they're worried about losing their crop, and so they're throwing everything in that arsenal, that chemical arsenal, and it's just not working anymore.
The
And so
other thing is that the biologicals are targeted, so you're not killing a whole bunch of different kinds of insects, correct?
right. And so, I mean, I've had I've had growers cry on me. I've had them cuss at me. I've had, so I used to joke and say, when I'm working with a grower, the first year they can't stand me, the second year they tolerate me, the third year they love me. Because, if I'm working with a large greenhouse, it may be tens of thousands of dollars in that first year. The second year, it's, maybe half of that. And then the third year, because you've changed the ecosystem. A lot of the bugs we're using are native. And so that's why you don't see, in my opinion, why chemical companies aren't raising. Well, so, like Syngenta definitely has like a biological line, but I think other chemical companies don't raise biologicals, but you can't patent it. You can't patent something that's already in the nature.
Give them time.
Give it some time. That's right. That's right. I'm being naive here.
So, the relationship between the predator and the prey is specialized in nature. So you're saying that specialized relationship is one of the advantages of biologicals, whereas if you use a chemical, the chemical that kills the target species is also going to kill spiders and praying mantises.
Absolutely. And so in the biological world, we have predators and parasitoids that are specialized, and we have some that are generalists. So like the one that I said that we use for fleas is also something we're using for thrips or spider mites. I mean, so it has so many, that's an example of a generalist predator. But yeah, I mean, I've had growers lie to me. They're like, I haven't sprayed. I'm like, yes, you have. I know you have. I mean, I should write a book. But the older I get, it's just hard to, it's just hard. I mean, it is hard to flip a greenhouse. And I've done very small greenhouse operations, and I've done 5 acres of greenhouse, and I've worked with large, butterfly houses and tropical houses, and it's just difficult. And again, it's trying to get people, and a lot of times it looks like it's getting bad, it's getting worse, and then it's like magic, and it just takes a while to turn it around. But it's not a new science, and that's, again, I think it's easier at this point in my career to focus on homeowners. Because yeah, it is an upfront cost, but you're saving money. I mean, if I'm having to only treat my yard every 5 or 6, 7 years for fleas, I mean, that's a huge saving. So really, I work myself out of business with growers and homeowners, because once they've done, I mean, yeah, people like to buy mantid egg cases every year. They eat everybody, including their brothers and sisters. But there are a lot of better biologicals for the homeowners that aren't so expensive.
I seriously thought about treating my yard this year, my backyard, for chiggers, and I know you got those 2 mites.
We've done a lot of chigger control this year.
Under $100, you can treat your yard for a bunch of years, and so I've definitely thought about that.
So that's and then there's everybody wants to know somebody else that's doing it first before they make the commitment. Again, we're held at a much higher standard than chemical companies. I mean, I don't see anybody calling their chemical reps and griping that their product's not working. But it just is what it is.
As long as you poison everything and everybody, you're good.
Yes, that's the way to go. So,
well, Blair, so Idlewild, you also have plants. So this is a big year, a big time of year for your plants. And so what do you have growing and plant wise, and then what do you have growing on them in terms of your caterpillars and stuff?
Oh gosh. So we've got, I think September is probably our biggest month of the year, probably more than May. Mother's Day is usually our kickoff for, bug and butterfly season. And in September we have Flutterfest, which we still are having at the zoo. And it's going to be probably going to be virtual, where we tag and release 1,000 monarchs. And getting back to when, you know, people are talking about these monarchs aren't making it to Mexico that are reared. Well, I've had several monarchs recovered in Mexico.
Really? You have?
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
So that's what I say when people are telling me things like, show me
So
the data.
you're saying you tag them at Idlewild Butterfly Farm.
We'll tag these at the zoo, and then we're going to release them. But we'll do several release packages with adults or chrysalids, and then, you know, tags. And it's just a fun way, I think, to get involved in the process, in the migration process. But at Idlewild, Lord, what do we? So yeah, fall, and then we started doing a fall plant sale, which I'm almost convinced that it's more popular than the spring plant sale. I love plants. I love greenhouses. I love greenhouse work. We don't grow our own plants. We contract all of our plants out. And so our two suppliers of our natives is Margaret Shea at Drop Seed, and Alicia Basella at Ironweed Nursery. And I trust them. They grow have a great finished product, and they're both very knowledgeable about natives, and, you know, I learn a lot from them. In terms of, you know, if we're doing habitat restoration, if we're trying to add something, or if something doesn't look right. Those are my two go-to women. Our other annuals and things that we have grown for us. And we're very niche. I mean, we don't really stray too far out of plants for beneficials and butterflies, even though we have started offering vegetable plants. And we did very well in the spring because we're offering vegetable plants that we guarantee, again, that are not sprayed with chemicals. They're grown with good bugs and love, not drugs. And so we have our fall cold crops up now. But right now, what you'll find, we definitely have our favorites and our natives, because it's not just host plants. You got to have nectar plants too. And when people want to have a monarch way station, we encourage them to add other host plants, whether it be like a pawpaw or a spice bush, or, you know, something just so you can get more than just, everybody loves the monarchs, but we have so many different butterflies that need a home and food. Some of my favorites, of course, are buttonbush. Buttonbush is fantastic in terms of nectar source. It provides for not just butterflies, lots of, you know, zooms and buzzers. So that's a favorite.
Buttonbush. I've heard that it likes wet soil, but maybe
it does like to have its wet feet. I mean, mine is down kind of on the edge of my front yard where all the runoff goes into the sewer. So that's where I have 3 of them down there.
If you have that wet place, it's a good substitute for like butterfly bush. A butterfly bush is a non-native, but if you buttonbush,
non-native
bush, it provides nectar. It's also native, and so it's a host plant for some things.
And people, we don't sell butterfly bushes. A lot of people love them. We try to, when they call and ask if we carry them, we're like, we don't, but we do offer this if you're interested in it.
Right.
You know, we try very hard.
So what's a substitute for butterfly bush?
It's always a milkweed. We always say, well, if you really want, you know, start with a milkweed. Some other good ones, of course, are like your echinaceas, your purple coneflower, your pale purple coneflower. I've got 2 new ones that are doing that I planted last fall. So the downy skullcap has been a favorite. And what else did I plant out there that I really,
Have any mountain mint?
Mountain mint. I've got mountain mint out there, and it smells good. And the echinacea also serves as a host plant for like your pearl crescent butterflies. So those little tiny orange and black butterflies that are really sweet. So a lot of these plants are doing double duty. So another misconception is people think that the milkweed has to be blooming in order to attract monarchs. It doesn't. But when it blooms, then it's serving double duty, because then it's a nectar source for other pollinators. So again, it's just education. What else has been a great one out there? Oh, the cardinal flower. Cardinal flower. I think that's probably been a real popular one this season, for sure. So, and again, a lot of these plants are also, it's triple duty because they also could either be a food source for hummingbirds or other birds. And so it's
Well, what
just,
do hummingbirds like?
they like the cardinal flower out there. They also like, um, sorry, I have a child at my feet. Um, there is the Indian. If I hope I'm not screwing it up. It's an Indian pink, and it's a native, and it takes sun or shade, and it's a fantastic plant for hummingbirds. That's been another one. So
Coral honeysuckle?
coral honeysuckle. We also raise the snowberry clearwing. It looks like a hummingbird moth, but it's not the true hummingbird moth, but it is a clearwing. And so that, again, double duty. It's a host plant for that clearwing moth, but also a food source for hummingbirds. So that's also a real popular one. But the milkweeds by far, we sell a lot. We push a lot of milkweed. And people like to have multiple varieties.
So you have your common milkweed and you have your butterfly weed.
You have your swamp milkweed, and then you'll have some more obscure ones that are kind of hard to find, like your poke milkweed, not to be confused with poke. But poke milkweed, and it can take some shade, so that's a great one for folks that have a lot of shade. Your purple milkweed, milkweed, which is great for not so great soil. But I'd say the butterfly weed, the common, and your swamp are probably the three top. Common is probably my favorite. One of my favorite plant combinations is elderberry and common milkweed, because they bloom around the same time together, and it's so fragrant, and they just buzz with the pollinators. And then of course the elderberry, we use the flowers to make cordial, like an elderflower syrup. And then when the berries come on, a lot of people like to make their tinctures with the berries. So again, elderberry is another favorite. That's a great one for little butterflies and pollinators when it blooms. And then a food source for birds. So
Elderberry, I'm stuck on the. Can elderberries, are they edible, or there's some way of harvesting the elderberries?
well, I found this. It might have been Tavia was telling me, or she gave me some extra of the umbels, the flowers, and we just cook that down with lemon and citric acid, and you make a simple syrup with it, and it's great just to make the kids like a fizzy water, or you can make a cocktail with it. And then when the berries turn purple, I haven't done that yet, but we have a lot of folks that come and get our berries, and they make I guess like their elderberry syrup with it. So,
well, I want to find out about how to get in touch with you, but also let's talk a little bit about this Monarch Migration. It's like, aren't there 4 generations of monarchs, and which ones what generation do we see in Kentucky?
so we have 4 to 5. It just depends
Okay.
kind of where you are. So soon they'll start. So there's 3 things that trigger the monarch migration. It can be one or all 3, and that's the shortening of the photo period. So when day starts getting shorter, it is the degradation of your native milkweeds, and it's a cooler temp. And it's 1 or 3 of those, and that's what triggers it. And so it starts from Canada, and for where our latitude is, it usually is around, our peak migration is around, I think the 14th to 21st is really when we see our peak. But I see them again all the way up until early November. And I've never seen, I see stragglers. I've never seen really big clumps of them. I have a friend here in town, Kay Milam. She put a film out a couple years ago called The Butterfly Trees, and she just chases them all over the place from Canada all the way down into Mexico. And so I think she's actually been lucky enough to see, I think she caught them finally crossing the border from Texas into Mexico. It's just such a fascinating phenomena, and at this point, I don't think so much that the monarchs themselves are in danger, but I do believe that the migration itself is in danger. Again, with these erratic temperature changes, they could be you know, they can, if we stay warm longer, then they're held back longer, and then they could be in mid migration mode to Mexico and then get hit with a huge storm. I mean, there's just there's any number of things that could really, I mean, they are, I would say, I think it's safe to say that it's definitely fragile. And it's a shame. I mean, you can go to Mayan ruins and see depictions of monarchs. You know, the monarch migration is of importance to the Day of the Dead celebration. Mexicans believe that that is their ancestor spirits coming back to visit. It's just, it's so sad. And I think for me, instead of just worrying about it constantly and just the state of our world and you know, we have children, you know, to me, it's just better just to stay busy and try to just educate and get the word out. And
Well, half of what we need to do is right there at Idlewild Butterfly Farm, you know. So this has been a journey into the wonderful world of bugs with Blair Leano-Helvey. And Blair, how do we get in touch with you?
IdlewildButterflyFarm.com is the best. We're trying frantically to put, you know, packages together for children, you know, because in Jefferson County it's NTI. So, you know, things that can help parents, whether it's a painted lady butterfly life cycle kit, which they're very inexpensive and it's a great way to see, you know, start to finish. Monarch kits, offering, you know, we get a lot of we get everybody. We get private school, homeschool, public school, and just to offer services and information, links, to help parents, you know, teach their kids, you know, just basic life cycles. But, you know, kids, I'm always amazed by how much kids know about insects. And I do feel like, you know, if you expose them to it, it gives them something to do. You know, that's what I did as a kid. I knocked over rocks and looked for bugs. I went to Knox County and spent summers at my granny's. And that was always interesting to me. I always felt like I had to go to the farm to see bugs, to see great big bugs, because we couldn't find those at home, you know. And now we can. You know, I always decorated my parents' home with insects. You know, I remember experiencing the first cicada, the 17-year cicada, and I was a little girl, and I would just decorated their house and put them under their pillows and the refrigerator, you know, where bugs should be.
Well, I wish we could talk longer. We've just scratched the surface. We're going to have to do it again sometime.
Yes, absolutely.
Blair, thanks so much for joining us. And Barbara, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you all.
To our audience, have a great day.
Bye-bye.